Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. I want to read a couple quotes in the beginning of this book. Again, the title is The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. Another great work by R.W. Thompson, former Secretary of the American Navy and author of the book The Papacy and the Civil Power, which we read months ago. Here's a couple quotes from R.W. Thompson. This from Pope Clement Pope Clement XIV, the Pope who suppressed the Jesuits. It says, quote, "It was very difficult, not to say impossible, that the Church could that the Church could recover a firm or durable peace so long as said society existed." Speaking of the Jesuit order, it was impossible for the Roman Catholic Church to recover a firm or durable peace so long as the Jesuits existed. Another quote from G.B. Niccolini of Rome, he said, quote, "The Jesuits, by their very calling, by their very essence of their institution, are bound to seek, by every means, right or wrong, the destruction of Protestantism. This is the condition of their existence and the duty they must fulfill or cease to be Jesuits." So, reiterating a point that is always being reminded of here on Inquisition Update, the purpose, the sole primary purpose of the Jesuit order is to destroy Protestantism by whatever means necessary, right or wrong, fair or foul. The Jesuits must destroy Protestantism. And this is understandable when you recognize that the Protestant Reformation nearly destroyed the papacy. It's the only enemy against which the papacy has no defense, and that is the truth, the biblical truth. And Protestantism embodies the truth. And the papacy sees it that way, and it is its lethal enemy. And it has reared up the Jesuit order for the purpose of eliminating the truth and eliminating the threat posed to the papacy by the truth, by Protestantism. Now, if you're following along in your own copy of the book, we're currently in the preface. This is page 4 of the book, and I'll begin with the first full paragraph, backing up one paragraph for continuity purposes. It says, "To my mind, it's also clear that a nation acts politically and not religiously when it decides upon the structure of its temporal government. That is, whether its affairs shall be managed by an absolute or elective monarch, or by machinery provided by a written constitution. I have therefore refrained from the discussion or criticism of religious belief, as it is understood in the American sense, any further than it is made the pretext for the reversal of this opinion so generally prevalent in this country. It would be an evil day for the people of the United States if they should ever be persuaded to permit any power whatsoever, whether temporal or spiritual, at home or abroad, to share with them any portion of their political authority or to dictate in any degree the measures of their civil polity. Solemn warning from R.W. Thompson. It would be a sad day indeed if the American people ever acquiesced to allowing someone else to govern over them." R.W. Thompson was a proponent of self-government, Republican form of government, the free institutions of the United States, and he understood that the papacy would have none of it, would have it completely destroyed, and would have it replaced by a papal theocracy, a monarchy, a brutal, tyrannical monarchy. And that's what is happening both in the United States and the rest of the world. The New World Order is simply the old world order restored, And now R.W. Thompson's going to tell us more about the old world order, and not so old, by the way, as we shall see as we continue. He says, in reminding those into whose hands this volume may chance to fall of their obligations of citizens under our popular form of government, I have found it absolutely necessary to portray the character of the Jesuits, but for whom, in my opinion, there would be but little to disturb us. R.W. Thompson is telling us that if it were not for the Jesuits, there would be little to disturb us here in the United States of America. If you stop and just comprehend what R.W. Thompson said, Secretary of the American Navy, astutely trained to assess all threats to our constitutional republic, both domestic and foreign, he said that if it were not for the Jesuits, there would be little to disturb us here in the United States. R.W. Thompson's putting all the threat to this republic upon the Jesuits' front doorstep. I don't see how anybody can read this any different. He said, I am reminding those into whose hands this volume may chance to fall, this book. It's in my hands, so this warning applies to me, of their obligations of citizenship under our popular form of government. I have found it absolutely necessary to portray the character of the Jesuits, but for whom, in my opinion, there would be but little to disturb us. This society has nothing in common with American ideas or principles. It represents monarchism in its most despotic and obnoxious form by requiring each of its members to impersonate the most abject servility and to accept this humiliation as an absolutely necessary part of religious faith. It has had a history unlike that of any other society in the world. In pointing out its origin and tracing its footprints among the nations, I have relied upon the most undoubted authority, much of which is furnished by Jesuit authors. A careful examination of the evidence will leave the mind of the reader in no doubt as to the odium which rested upon the society from the beginning, as well as the manner in which it has disturbed the quiet of the nations, defied the popes themselves when adverse to them, and disregarded the interest, welfare, and harmony of the church it professed to serve when required by its general. I have deemed it important to trace out some of the leading events which have transpired under the pontificates of Gregory XVI, Pius IX, and Leo XIII up to the present time. In this way only is it possible to understand the full meaning of the revolution which led to Italian unity and the overthrow of the temporal power of the Pope by Roman Catholic populations, and what is involved in the demand for its restoration. Now, before I continue, since Americans are generally very historically challenged, myself included until I began my research into the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order, the Italian people, right there in the shade of the walls of the Vatican, decided they'd had quite enough of this Pope in Rome. They didn't want him as a king anymore. He was oppressive, dictatorial, and persecutorial of anyone who opposed him, whether that opposition came in the form of doubtful thinking, or words, or print, or actions. Anyone who defied the Pope in any degree of his laws and his right to rule were regarded as heretics, and they were tormented by the Inquisition. Now, the Italian people got quite fed up with it. Many Italian people, though even grudgingly, would allow the papacy to remain the head of their spiritual lives. But they no more wanted any pope to rule over them in the temporal realm. They wanted their own government. They wanted independence. They wanted their own government. They wanted to have input in their own government, much like the United States of America. They looked to the United States for an example of self-rule, and they decided that as a people they would succeed better under that form of government than under a papal form of government. And so it led to a revolution in Italy, throwing off the temporal power of the Pope and asserting unto themselves the right of self-government. Now, R.W. Thompson continues, he says, in doing this, I have considered only such matters as are political religious, in the sense common among the people of the United States, and which cannot be made a part of religious faith without doing violence to the recognized spirit of our civil institutions. Thus I have avoided any conflict with those who prefer the Roman Catholic to the Protestant form of religious belief, for the express reason that I have neither the purpose nor desire to question their right to do so. It seems to me that the constitutional guarantee which protects this right ought to be satisfactory to all, and cannot be disturbed without imperiling our government. Therefore, all I desire will be accomplished if I shall succeed in convincing thoughtful Roman Catholics that it will be far better for all of us if they shall decline to accept the political religious teachings of the Jesuits as part of their religious faith, and content themselves without interference with the political affairs of their Christian brethren in Italy. They may maintain fidelity to the government as patriotically as professed Protestants, without abating their devotion to the spiritual doctrines which prevailed in their church before the fall of the Roman Empire enabled the popes to place the crown of temporal royalty upon their heads. To this end I would, if permitted, appeal to that portion of our population in all sincerity, and invoke the exercise of their allegiance to no less than their patriotism. And if any of them shall peruse this volume and carefully consider its contents, they will see that what I have written centers in the hope that the Protestants and Roman Catholics of the United States shall live together in the concord of Christian fellowship, emulating each other in those things that shall tend most to promote their mutual happiness and preserve for their common posterity the civil and religious liberty guaranteed by our Constitution and laws. There are abundant evidences to show that the Jesuits have adopted a loose code of morality, upon which they have built up a system of moral theology as irreconcilable with the true teachings of the Roman Catholic religion as they are with the well-established doctrines of all Protestant Christians. But I have refrained from any discussion of these, not only because this is sufficiently done by Pascal and Bert in France and by numerous American authors, but because my main object is to show that the triumph of the Jesuits in this country would bring about such a condition of things as would imperil our civil institutions. They teach as religious doctrines necessary to salvation the following: that the state must be united with the church and be required to obey its spiritual commands in the enactment of its laws, that the Roman Catholic religion shall be established by law as the only true religion, and every other form of religious belief treated and punished as heresy. That along with this destruction of the freedom of religious belief, there must be corresponding restrictions placed upon the liberty of speech and of the press. That the Roman Catholic Church shall be recognized as an organization exempt from obedience to all our laws relating to the ownership and management of real property. that the clergy of that church shall also be exempt from obedience to the laws as other citizens, and shall obey only such as the Pope may prescribe, and that our common school system of education must be absolutely and entirely destroyed. If in these things the Jesuits should obtain success, our government would necessarily come to an end. And what this volume contains has been written alone with the view of making this question plain and palpable to the ordinary reader. I have written from the standpoint of an American citizen, thoroughly impressed with the belief that this is the most prosperous country in the world, and not from that of a theologian. About the duties and obligations of the former to the government, I assume to have learned something from both instinct and education. But about the metaphysical subtleties of the theologians, I do not trouble myself. I know how difficult it is to escape the accusation of a persecuting spirit from those who, like the Jesuits, allow nothing for honest differences of opinion. This, however, ought not to be permitted to interfere with the plain and obvious duty of defending our civil institutions from any assault made upon them, no matter by whom or in whose name the assailing forces shall be marshaled. With the conscientiousness, therefore, that this volume may subject me to the imputation of uncharitableness from some upon whom I would inflict no injury in return, I have expressed myself with candor and fairness, and have written nothing in malice. Signed, R.W. Thompson, from Terre Haute, Indiana, 1894. So this book was written in 1894. It was immediately preceded by his previous work, The Papacy and the Civil Power, which my listeners are familiar with, and as is the tradition of R.W. Thompson. He takes no issue, or very little issue, with the Roman Catholic religion itself as it pertains to religious belief. What R.W. Thompson assails the Roman Catholic Church is for its interference in the temporal affairs of the people of the world. R.W. Thompson approaches the subject of his book from a secular point of view and leaves the theological arguments to Christians of both sides, Protestant and Catholic. His interest is to protect the sovereignty of this nation and to assess the most severe threats of that free constitutional republic from enemies foreign and domestic. And his assessment is clear and obvious and biblical, that there is no threat to this country but by the Roman Catholic Church, by the Jesuit order, who demands that the world submit on its knees to the Pope in temporal and in spiritual things. And that's why this author has examined in this book the footprints of the Jesuits throughout history. If we are going to understand the most grave threat to our constitutional republic and Protestantism, we must understand the role that the Jesuits have played throughout history. And we already know that their main, if not their sole object, is to destroy Protestantism. You see, the Pope cannot raise himself to global supremacy, King of Kings and Lord of Lords, so long as there are Protestants who protest the Pope and assert that it is Jesus Christ alone who is the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, and he doesn't need a Pope. He doesn't need a vicar. Okay? That's what this book is all about. And I hope my listeners will appreciate it. Now, Chapter 1 is an introductory chapter. Again, the title of the book is Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. He says, the American people have imbibed from association the spirit of their civil institutions and are ready at all times to repel any direct assault upon them. They are, however, so actively engaged in their various pursuits that multitudes of them fail to recognize the necessity of inquiring whether the conflict between opposing principles of government which resulted in our national independence has or has not ended. Whether, in other words, the victory of the founders of the Republic won over monarchism, or is it not final? Okay? Did we really win over monarchism? Or did monarchism just receive a temporary wound and hopes to rise to fight again? Hopes that that wound might be healed and that it might again subject both the United States and the rest of the world to submit to a global monarchy. Now, he says, those who won this victory intended to provide against this seeming want of vigilance by means of some system of education, which should assimilate the principles and opinions of the people as a perpetual bulwark against aggression. This would have been accomplished long ago if the paternal counsels of Presidents Washington and Madison had been heeded as they deserve to be, that we should educate, quote, our youth in the science of government, unquote, under the auspices and protection of national authority. Instead of this, we have considered ourselves sufficiently shielded by our system of public school education under state control and have mainly relied upon this to fit our children for citizenship and self-government. Hitherto, we have not been seriously disturbed by the apprehension that it would result in failure, and for that reason it has been maintained with great popular unanimity. It is now, however, assailed with violence, and manifestly with the purpose of destroying it entirely. Hence, we are all required, by obligations we cannot rightfully evade, to rest long enough from our active avocations to discover, if possible, why this is, what motives impel the assailants, and whether or no they desire to substitute other principles of government for ours, by turning us back upon a course we have solemnly repudiated. Are they trying to restore monarchical forms of government in our school system? That's what's happening. We'll be back right after this.
Years ahead of the dominant media, FirstAmendmentRadio.com and FirstAmendmentRadio.net.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a Left Behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. Remember, before we continue, that Inquisition Update is listener-supported. And it's First Amendment Radio that pays the bills. So if you would like Inquisition Update to continue, if you would like to continue receiving this rare truth, this historical and biblical and prophetic truth, on Inquisition Update, please support FirstAmendmentRadio.com. All I ask is your prayers, that God would continue to protect and provide as I continue in His service. And thanks, Brother Nicholas. I appreciate you. And we'll continue now. R.W. Thompson said, oh, and by the way, if you'd like to contact me with a comment or a question, you may do so by emailing me at tom@seawaves.us. That's tom@seawaves.us. tom@seawaves.us. Sometimes I'm slow, but I answer all email that require an answer, so please feel free to email me. If nothing else, just to get acquainted. R.W. Thompson said before the break, speaking of our constitutional republic, our system of self-government, he said our government, is now, however, assailed with violence and manifestly with the purpose of destroying it entirely. Hence, we are all required, by obligations we cannot rightfully evade, to rest long enough from our active avocations to discover, if possible, why this is. What motivations impel the assailants, and whether or no they desire to substitute other principles of government for ours by turning us back upon a course we have solemnly repudiated. And what did we solemnly repudiate in this country? Tyranny, a monarchical form of government. Most of the immigrants to this country in the colonial period were immigrants from Europe and England who were sick and tired of the papal system. The Pope ruling over the kings of the earth and tyrannizing the people. They wanted religious and civil liberty. They wanted to govern themselves, and many of them were capable of self-government, because they had God's law written upon their hearts. They didn't need a pope or a king imposing their own laws, most of which, counterfeited at best God's law and His power, and forcibly caused the people to violate God's law. They were sick and tired of the Pope as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And they were sick and tired of the kings who ruled over them for turning a deaf ear to the needs of the people and relying upon the papacy for direction and instruction. They were sick and tired of religious persecution. Anyone who raised a voice or printed a page that contained anything contrary to the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church were punished by the civil powers, by the kings that ruled over them. They were sick and tired of Antichrist. And they came to this country with Christ in their hearts, knowing that with Him within them and having God's holy law written upon their hearts, they could govern themselves in righteousness. That was the hope of the early founders of this country. They had thrown off the yoke of papal Rome. They had thrown off the yoke of papal tyranny, inquisitions, crusades, and holy wars. And they wanted peace. They unseated the Pope, both in their hearts and off of his throne, so that he could tyrannize no one else. We can thank the Protestant reformers for overthrowing the papal power. But the papal power didn't die. And it has slowly, since that time, sought to regain its power and to bring the whole world back under his supreme authority. Our nation, our free institutions, our Protestant institutions were challenged by the papacy almost from the very beginning. Rome will never cease her attempt to bring us all back under her authority. And the Jesuits are her supreme warriors. If anyone in this world, as a single entity, has charge of subjecting the whole world to papal authority, it's the Jesuit order. And where did they set up shop? Right here in so-called Protestant America. And nary a voice has been raised against them except great people like R.W. Thompson and some of the other authors that we've read here on Inquisition Update. It's my pleasure to read this book, and I hope the listeners will comprehend what R.W. Thompson is attempting to tell us. He continues, he says, in addition to other works of like character but less ability, there is one extensively circulated in this country from the pen of a writer conspicuous for his learning and ability. The author asserts without disguise that what he calls, quote-unquote, Catholicity, that is, what the Roman popes taught when they were temporal monarchs, has been more beneficial to the world and more civilizing in its influences upon mankind than Protestantism, not alone in a social, but in a political, religious, and literary point of view. His argument proceeds from the Jesuit standpoint and may be summed up in a single sentence, that Protestantism has placed mankind in a far worse condition than they were when they were dominated over by papal kings. Okay, the title of this work says Protestantism and Catholicity Compared in Their Effects on the Civilization of Europe by Reverend I. Balmes. Okay? This is the work that was circulating throughout the world, that Protestantism was a detriment to human society and that the papal monarchy was a far better system of government. Now, this work was intended to counteract the effect produced by the writings of Guizot, the great French historian, who maintained by eloquent and matchless reasoning that mankind had been improved in every point of view by the influences of Protestantism. Accordingly, it was translated from Spanish, in which language it was originally written, into French and German, and extensively circulated in France and Germany. It soon acquired the reputation among the Jesuits of being unanswerable, and on that account was regarded in the conflict between progress and retrogression, that is, Protestantism and papal tyranny, like heavy ordnance in battle, a suitable weapon with which to attack Protestantism and its institutions in the seat of its great strength. So the Jesuits are going to use this work to assail Protestantism right here in the land of Protestantism. Now, therefore, it was translated into the English language and printed by 2 publishing houses in the United States for circulation among the American people. An American preface is attached, wherein these propositions are affirmed. First, that Protestantism compels its votaries to infidelity by its variations of belief. In other words, attacking the denominational divisions of Protestants. Second, that civilization was not only commenced, but was prospered under quote-unquote Catholicity when it was regarded by retarded by Protestantism, which is unfavorable and injurious to it. And third, that the principles of Protestantism are incompatible with the happiness of mankind and, quote, unfavorable to civil liberty, unquote. That's what this Catholic apologist asserts. That Protestantism is divided even among itself, which is a shame in comparison to the Roman Catholic Church, where everyone is forced to believe, think, and do whatever the Pope says. Okay? And second, that civilization only prospered under Catholicity, and that prospering was retarded by Protestantism. And that the principles of Protestantism are completely incompatible with mankind and unfavorable to civil liberty. Okay, it's a wholesale condemnation of Protestantism. Now, this preface, which manifestly bears the Jesuit impress, was intended to notify American readers beforehand that the 3 foregoing propositions are maintained in the body of the work, and to prepare their minds for the acceptance of them. Its reprint and circulation in the United States could have had no other object than to inculcate the belief that what the people of this country have supposed to be the advantages they have derived from Protestant institutions are in fact absolutely injurious to them, and that their condition would be improved by the revival of such as existed during the Middle Ages before the Reformation. In other words, we need to go back to the old world order. The new world order at that time was Protestantism. Self-government. Government of, by, and for the people. Let the people govern themselves because they have Christ and they have the Holy Spirit and they have the Bible and they have God's law. They have conscience. They don't have the Pope, they have Christ. But the papacy hated that system and wished that the world would return to the old world order. That's exactly what the new world order is today. I want my listeners to understand this. All this talk about the New World Order and almost never a word about the papacy or the Jesuits, coming from either the mainstream or the alternative medias. Is the press controlled? You be the judge. But for my part, I believe the press is completely controlled. And if nothing else, the fear runs through society that you don't dare criticize the quote-unquote Christian religion. But that's all based on the erroneous assumption, the erroneous assertion that Catholicism is Christianity. It is not Christianity. That's why the Christians, the Bible-believing Christians, having read the Bible for themselves for the first times in their lives, leading up to the Protestant Reformation, rebelled against the papacy, called the papacy Antichrist. That's the enlightened age. The light came from Christ. It came from the Scriptures. But the Pope would throw us back into the Middle Ages, also known as the Dark Ages, of ignorance and superstition and servility and humility. Abject humility and slavery. The papacy believes that it is the replacement of the Son of God on earth, and every man, woman, and child has a moral and temporal responsibility to obey the Pope. The papacy has usurped the throne of Almighty God in the world. And our government is controlled by the Jesuit order. And the Roman Catholic Church has conquered this nation. Because Protestants were led to sleep. R.W. Thompson back in 1894 was trying to wake up the American people to the threat that the Jesuits and the Roman Catholic Church posed upon this free country. Warned them repeatedly that the Jesuits, if they had their way, would throw us back into the Dark Ages. And that's precisely what has happened. And only because Protestants left their Protestant heritage, repudiated the Protestant reformers, repudiated the notion that the papacy was, is, and always will be the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, the counterfeit Christ in the earth. And now they believe it's a Christian institution, that Roman Catholicism is Christianity, when the opposite is true. And because they believe that the Roman Catholic Church is a Christian institution, seeing its power and influence in Washington, D.C., and the advantages that they would supposedly gain under a quote-unquote Christian society led by the Roman Catholic Church, they have ecumenically united with the Roman Catholic Church, and now they are a political power against which there is no rival except Christ himself. That's what's going on in the United States and the world today. A unification of all the world's religions under the headship of the papacy. All forms of government are subservient to the Holy See. The Holy See dictates the laws of the world. That's why the United Nations is collecting guns. That's why the United Nations has taken upon itself the role of disarming the world's people. The King of Kings, their beloved King of Kings and Lord of Lords, is now governor of the world, and he wants no opposition. No opposition in word, or in deed, or in thought, or in action. And to strip the people of their power, to make them slaves to the papacy, as it was in the dark days of the Dark Ages, the people have to be disarmed. And the United Nations is the instrument through which this disarmament is taking place. And the American government is subservient to the United Nations, the Pope's governing authority in the world. You see where this has gone. See why it was so important for Americans to heed the warnings of R.W. Thompson. He says, by giving prominence to political matters and discussing them from the Jesuit point of view, this author presents a plain, distinct, and practical issue between progress and retrogression. He intends to make it as plain to the minds of his readers as it seems to be in his own, that governments constructed upon the monarchical plan confer more happiness and prosperity upon society than those upon the Protestant plan of self-government. Evidently, it was the hope of disseminating this belief that this work had been reprinted and circulated in the United States so extensively that it is believed to have become a standard authority among the Jesuit enemies of Protestantism. If it does nothing else, however, it apprises our Protestant population that a powerful influence exists among them which is uncompromisingly hostile to the principles which underlie the whole structure of their government. And being thus apprised, their indifference would be little less than criminal, because their adroit aggressors would construe it into fear of possible consequences or assign it to their inability to combat successfully the arguments supplied by this work, whose author is an acknowledged monarchist. So this book was circulated all throughout the country, reprinted over and over, redistributed to the American people, and it openly defied self-government. And it said that the best course for the American people is to return to the dark days of the Dark Ages and papal monarchy. And the Jesuits used it as their guidebook. The Jesuits, who now control Washington, D.C., and the papacy, and the Supreme Court, and the White House. R.W. Thompson continues, he says, the differences between popular and monarchical government are well known and appear at every point of comparison which has arisen during the course of events since the Reformation of the 16th century. So here we have a clear reference from R.W. Thompson that the Reformation, the Protestant Reformation, was where we got popular government. That is, governments of, by, and for the people. It stripped the power from the Pope. It stripped the power from the papal kings and the monarchs and gave it to the people. We can attribute our liberties to one thing in history, that is the Protestant Reformation of the 16th century. He says the former have achieved their completest triumphs where Protestantism prevails, and in its presence the latter have been compelled either entirely to surrender their pretensions or to abate their demands for absolutism. Until the Reformation became an accomplished fact, monarchism was maintained by uniting church and state and employing their joint authority to coerce, that is, to force obedience from the multitude. The dominion thus acquired condemned self-government by the people as both heresy and treason, punishable at the pleasure of those who held the reins of authority in their hands. Okay? If you were a promoter of self-government, you are a domestic terrorist to the established power. If you talked about independence or Protestantism, you were a domestic terrorist to the established power, the papacy and the kings over whom he ruled. He says it took many years of conflict to change this condition of affairs, and when the people of the United States were, in the course of events, placed in a condition to choose between this coercive system and that which was a natural outgrowth of Protestantism, and to construct a government for themselves, their wisdom was sufficient to assure them that any plan of government they adopted would result in failure unless they distinguished between their politics and their religion by separating the church from the state and by so framing their civil institutions as to preserve to themselves alone the entire sovereignty over them. It was important that if self-government was going to survive, there must be a separation between church and state. If self-government was ever going to survive, its only hope was that church and state would be forever separate. because they understood that if the church ever gained control over the government, it would impose once again the monarchical system of the Pope. You can think of it also this way. The Protestant reformers, those who still had Protestant blood coursing through their veins, recognized that if there was not a permanent wall of separation between church and state, the door was open for the papacy to get control of the government. And as long as there was religious liberty in this country, where Roman Catholicism could practice and prosper side by side with Protestants, whereas they were forbidden to do so in England, where Catholicity was outlawed in England, then they could indeed eventually gain control of the government. And that's exactly what has happened in this country. And you can expect now, with so much control of the Roman Catholic Church, the Holy See, the Vatican, the Pope, the Jesuits in Washington, D.C., we are seeing a unification now of church and state. And I believe that it's going to become official, outwardly admitted. But it's already a matter of widespread discussion in the churches of the United States. We need to get back to God, they say. This is a Christian nation, and we need to get control of politics in this country. What is that but a union of church and state? And those who propound that Christians should have a participatory role, an active role, a controlling role in government are influenced by the doctrines that have come out of Vatican Council II. And they have already assented to the papacy as their spiritual head. The only thing to be discussed now is whether the Pope shall be the temporal head. And that he already is, because we fail to heed the warnings of R.W. Thompson and all of these true Bible-believing Protestant authors of the 18th century and 19th century. We'll continue with our reading of The Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson on the program tomorrow. Thanks for listening. You've been listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.